the Nabatean kingdom. Beneath the burning sands of modern-day Jordan lies the legacy of a civilization both enigmatic and extraordinary, the Nabatean kingdom, flourishing between the 4th century BCE and 106 CE. The Nabateans were master traders, engineers, and stone carvers. Their capital, Petra, curved directly into rose-colored cliffs, was once a bustling nexus connecting Arabia, Egypt, and the Mediterranean. Yet, despite their immense wealth and influence, they left behind no grand written records, no royal chronicles, only silence and stone. How did a nomadic tribe evolve into a sophisticated kingdom with advanced hydraulic systems, astronomical alignments, and monumental architecture? Their water management, a long-diverting desert flash floods into hidden cisterns and reservoirs, was so precise that it sustained a city in one of the harshest climates on Earth. Greek and Roman historians mention them only in passing, often perplexed by their sudden rise and abrupt disappearance. In 106 CE, the kingdom was annexed by Rome, and, just like that, the Nabateans seemed to fade into history. No tales of conquest, no signs of rebellion, just an empire, quietly absorbed today. Petra stands as a haunting reminder of a people who mastered nature, controlled trade routes, and vanished with few answers. Perhaps the greatest mystery isn't how they lived, but why so little of their voice remains in the pages of time. The Palmyrene Empire rising from the sands of Syria. The Palmyrene Empire emerged as a defiant beacon of power, brief, brilliant, and shrouded in mystery, at the crossroads of East and West. The city of Palmyra flourished as a wealthy caravan hub, linking Rome with Persia, India, and beyond. But in the 3rd century CE, as the Roman Empire staggered under internal strife and external threats, Palmyra rose not just as a city, but as a sovereign force. At its helm was Queen Zenobia, a woman of formidable intellect and ambition. In less than a decade, Zenobia led her forces across Egypt, Anatolia, and parts of the Levant, carving out an empire that rivaled Rome itself. Her court blended Roman elegance with Eastern opulence. She claimed descent from Cleopatra and styled herself as empress. Yet, historians still debate her true motives. Was she seizing power for personal glory, or preserving order amid Roman collapse? In 273 CE, the Roman Emperor Aurelian struck back. Palmyra fell. Zenobia was captured, paraded through Rome in chains, then vanished into historical ambiguity. Some say she lived out her days in luxury, others claim execution. The Palmyrene Empire, once a symbol of rebellion and cultural fusion, was swiftly erased from the map. What drove this desert queen to challenge an empire? And why did her meteoric rise leave so few lasting traces? The ruins of Palmyra whisper fragments, but the full story remains hidden beneath centuries of sand. The kingdom of Meru, deep in the deserts of Nubia, along the curve of the Nile, once thrived, a kingdom unlike any other, the kingdom of Meru. From around 800 BCE to 350 CE, Meru served as the heart of the Kushite civilization, a powerful African dynasty that rose after the fall of Egypt's 25th dynasty, also known as the Black Pharaohs. But while Egypt's influence is undeniable, Meru forged its own distinct identity. Iron smelters hissed beside temple walls, pyramids with steep angles dotted the landscape, and a mysterious, undeciphered script filled their stone monuments. Unlike the pharaohs of Egypt, Meroitic rulers included powerful queens Candace, who led armies, ruled in their own right, and were feared by the Romans. One such queen, said to have faced down Emperor Augustus himself, was described in Roman accounts with both awe and confusion. The kingdom thrived through trade, controlling routes that carried gold, ivory, and exotic animals northward. Their art, religion, and language all reflected a fusion of African and Egyptian traditions, yet they were not merely imitators. Mero's architecture, economy, and political structure reveal a civilization with its own vision of power and permanence. And yet, by the 4th century CE, Meru fell silent. Drought, shifting trade, or invasion, no single theory explains the collapse. Their script remains largely unread, their voices still hidden in stone. Who were the Meroites truly? And what secrets might still lie buried beneath the sands of Nubia, waiting to rewrite Africa's forgotten chapter? The kingdom of Cushan, the shadow of ancient Egypt, a powerful civilization emerged, one that would one day conquer its northern neighbor. This was the kingdom of Kush, centered in what is now Sudan. Kush rose from the ashes of Egypt's new kingdom, around 1070 BCE, but it was not merely a reflection of Egypt. It was its rival, inheritor, and, at times, its ruler. By the 8th century BCE, the Kushite kings had marched north, taken control of Thebes, and established Egypt's 25th dynasty. These were the so-called Black Pharaohs, who ruled from the city of Napata, blending African traditions with Egyptian religion and art. But the heart of Kush would eventually shift south to Meru, where iron production flourished and new cultural expressions took shape. Unlike Egyptian hieroglyphs, the Meroitic script remains undeciphered, cutting off a direct voice from a people who left behind temples, pyramids, and a distinct vision of kingship, one that often included warrior queens, known as Kandaks. Greek and Roman historians viewed Kush with a mix of respect and confusion. They noted its wealth, its elephants, and its fierce independence. In one famous account, a Roman invasion was halted by a Kandaks army, proving Kush was no mere province of a greater empire, but a power in its own right. And yet, by the 4th century CE, the kingdom of Kush faded, its language forgotten, its monuments weathered. A civilization once strong enough to rule Egypt now survives mostly in scattered ruins and cryptic inscriptions. What stories were lost with their script, and what might still lie hidden beneath the soil of Nubia, waiting to speak again? The Kerma culture, long before the rise of the pharaohs. Deep in the heart of ancient Nubia, a civilization quietly flourished along the Nile. The Kerma culture, dating back to around 2500 BCE. Kerma was one of the earliest urban centers in sub-Saharan Africa. Its people built massive mud brick structures, including a towering temple complex known as the Western Defufa, an architectural feat that still stands today. At its height, Kerma rivaled Egypt in both wealth and power, serving as a hub for trade, cattle herding, and skilled craftsmanship. Unlike the centralized rule of Egypt, Kerma's society appears to have been more regionally complex, yet remarkably organized. Archaeological finds reveal massive burial sites filled with treasures, human sacrifices, and elaborate tombs, suggesting a ruling class that commanded deep reverence, or perhaps fear. Egyptian texts describe the Nubians as fierce warriors, and at times, allies or enemies depending on the shifting tides of power. What's most remarkable is that Kerma thrived even while under constant threat from its northern neighbor. For centuries, it resisted Egyptian domination, maintaining a distinct cultural identity marked by dark pottery, cattle cults, and unique burial traditions. But by 1500 BCE, Kerma fell to Egyptian conquest. The city was destroyed, and its legacy nearly lost beneath the stories written by its conquerors. Yet modern archaeology continues to unearth signs of a rich and complex kingdom, one that challenges the notion that Egypt stood alone in the cradle of early African civilization. What more might be revealed if we could hear Kerma's voice, not through Egyptian records, but through its own forgotten stones? The Nubian Empire, in the vast landscapes of the Nile Valley, south of ancient Egypt, rose an empire that would challenge the might of pharaohs and redefine Africa's ancient legacy. The Nubian Empire, often overshadowed in mainstream history. The Nubians were not merely neighbors to Egypt, they were builders, warriors, and kings in their own right. At the height of their power during the 8th century BCE, Nubian rulers from the kingdom of Kush conquered Egypt itself, establishing the 25th dynasty. From their capital at Napata, they ruled the united Nile Valley from the highlands of Nubia to the shores of the Mediterranean. These were the Black Pharaohs, whose statues and temples still stand in stark majesty. They restored traditional Egyptian values, revived old temples, and adopted pharaonic rituals, but always with a distinctly Nubian identity. Their power was not only military but cultural, spreading a unique blend of African and Egyptian traditions. Even after being pushed back by invading Assyrians, the Nubian Empire persisted. It shifted south to Meru, where it developed new technologies, an independent script, and a thriving iron industry. The empire's resilience echoed in the leadership of Kandaks queens, who led armies and governed with authority rare in the ancient world. But over time, trade routes changed, the land grew harsher, and by the 4th century CE, the empire faded. Its language remained undeciphered, its stories fragmented. The Nubian Empire shaped centuries of African and Mediterranean history, yet so much of its voice remains hidden. What truths might still lie buried along the riverbanks of forgotten kings? The A group culture, long before pyramids pierced the skies of Egypt, a lesser-known civilization, quietly flourished along the banks of the Nile. The Agroup culture, emerging around 3800 BCE in what is now southern Egypt and northern Sudan. The Agroup people were among the earliest complex societies of the Nile Valley. They lived in modest settlements, practiced agriculture, and built elaborate cemeteries with finely crafted goods, pottery, jewelry, and items of ivory and stone, all hinting at a surprisingly sophisticated way of life for such an early period. What makes the A group especially intriguing is their connection to early Egypt. Excavations reveal trade links between the two cultures: ebony, incense, and gold flowing north, while Egyptian goods moved south. Some archaeologists even suggest that these early Nubian communities played a vital role in shaping the emergence of Egypt's first dynasties. Yet despite their proximity and apparent influence, the I group left behind no writing, no grand monuments, only carefully arranged graves and artifacts that speak in whispers. Around 3100 BCE, the A culture abruptly vanished. Whether they were absorbed into rising Egyptian kingdoms, displaced by conflict, or simply evolved into later Nubian groups, remains uncertain. Egyptian records from the time grow silent, offering no explanation. Who were these early Nile dwellers, and what legacy did they leave behind? The sands of Lower Nubia have buried their stories well, but the scattered fragments suggest that the tale of civilization along the Nile began long before Egypt's first kings took the throne. The C group culture in the arid lands of ancient Nubia, between the first and second cataracts of the Nile, a mysterious people quietly thrived. The C group culture, emerging around 2300 BCE and lasting nearly 1,000 years. The C group people lived in small, scattered communities across Lower Nubia. Though they left behind no written records, their story is preserved through archaeology, stone tomb graves, painted pottery, and traces of pastoral life. They were skilled herders and traders, navigating a delicate balance between the desert and the river, living not by grand monuments, but by movement and resilience. The C group existed in the shadow of powerful neighbors. To the north, Egypt's Middle Kingdom expanded aggressively into Nubia, building forts and attempting control. Yet despite this pressure, the C group maintained a distinct identity, adopting some Egyptian customs while preserving their own burial traditions and social structures. Their graves often held cattle skulls, suggesting a deep cultural reverence for livestock. As centuries passed, the C group faded from history. By 1500 BCE, they disappeared from the archaeological record, likely displaced or absorbed during Egypt's New Kingdom conquest of Nubia. But their legacy may have lived on, possibly influencing later Nubian cultures such as the Kerma and Kushite civilizations. Who were the C group? Truly nomads, traders, a lost link in the long chain of Nile Valley civilizations. Their silence leaves only fragments, but each fragment hints at a culture that once held its ground between empire and emptiness. The Medes, high on the Iranian plateau, long before the rise of Persia's great empires, a shadowy power stirred in the mountains. The Medes. First mentioned by Assyrian records in the 9th century BCE, the Medes were a collection of Indo-Iranian tribes who gradually coalesced into a formidable force. They left behind no written history of their own, yet their presence loomed large in the chronicles of others. Known for their horsemanship, metalwork, and fierce independence, the Medes became a crucial player in the ancient Near East. By the 7th century BCE, under King Cyaxares, the Medes formed one of the earliest Iranian empires. They forged a powerful alliance with the Babylonians to bring down the Assyrian capital of Nineveh in 612 BCIA, moment that reshaped the region's balance of power. For a brief time, the Medes held sway over vast territories, stretching from Anatolia to western Iran, but their empire was short. Around 550 BCE, Cyrus the Great of Persia overthrew the last Median king, Astyages, though some accounts suggest it was less a conquest than a political unification. From that moment, the Medes vanished into the fabric of the Achaemenid Empire, their legacy preserved mostly through foreign eyes. What role did the Medes truly play in shaping early Iran? Were they the architects of imperial rule, or merely a bridge between older Mesopotamian powers and the Persian age to come? The silence of their own voice leaves the question open, hanging in the windswept valleys where their empire once stood. The Parthian Empire across the sweeping plains of ancient Iran, between the fall of Alexander's successors and the rise of Rome's eastern rival, stood an empire both elusive and resilient. the Parthian Empire. Founded in the mid-3rd century BCE by Arcases I, a nomadic chieftain from the northeastern steppe. The Parthians defied the mighty Seleucid Empire and carved out a realm that would endure for nearly 5 centuries. Their domains stretched from the Euphrates to the Indus, blending Hellenistic influences with Persian traditions, and governing not through centralized rule, but through a complex web of noble families and semi-autonomous regions. Capital Ctesiphon became a cultural melting pot, where Greek art met Zoroastrian fire temples, and silk from China passed through vast trade routes toward the Mediterranean. Yet, despite their reach, the Parthians left behind few inscriptions or monuments of their own. Much of what we know comes from Roman historians, who often painted them as mysterious and formidable foes. On the battlefield, the Parthians were unmatched in mounted warfare. Their famed horse archers could strike with deadly precision, while retreating, giving rise to the term Parthian shot. In 53 BCE, they delivered Rome one of its most humiliating defeats at Kai, where General Crassus and his legions were annihilated in the desert. And yet, the Parthians never sought conquest in the Roman sense. They fought to defend, to endure. By 224 CE, they were replaced by the Sasanian dynasty, but not erased. What lies behind the quiet pride of this forgotten empire? In the gaps left by Roman fear and Persian ambition, the Parthians remained silent, swift, and still partly unknown. The kingdom of Dilmunin, the shimmering heat of the Persian Gulf, amid the islands and coasts of present-day Bahrain and eastern Saudi Arabia, once thrived a kingdom cloaked in legend, the kingdom of Dilmun, first mentioned in Sumerian texts around 3000 BC. Dilmun was described as a land of purity, prosperity, and divine favor, a paradise where the gods themselves were said to dwell. But beyond myth, Dilmun was very real. It served as a vital trade hub between Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, and the Arabian Peninsula, linking the ancient world's great civilizations through a maritime network that carried copper, dates, pearls, and precious stones. Archaeological excavations on Bahrain have revealed large burial mounds, temple ruins, and artifacts bearing signs of both Sumerian and Harappan influence. This suggests that Dilmun was not just a waypoint, but a powerful kingdom with its own identity, economy, and spiritual life. The so-called Barber Temple and the sprawling necropolises point to a society both wealthy and deeply ritualistic. Yet despite its long prominence in ancient texts, Dilmun slowly faded from historical view by the end of the first millennium BCE. Changing trade routes, environmental shifts, or the rise of competing powers may have brought its decline. Its script, if it had one, remains unknown. Its rulers unnamed. How did a land once called the place where the sun rises vanish so quietly? The silence of Dilmun lingers buried beneath sand, sea, and the fragments of memory left behind in clay tablets far from its shores. The Meghan civilization along the rugged coastlines and sun-scorched mountains of what is now Oman and the United Arab Emirates once rose a civilization known to the ancients as Meghan, mentioned frequently in Sumerian and Akkadian texts dating back to the 3rd millennium BCE. Meghan was famed not for temples or kings, but for its ships and its copper. To Mesopotamia, it was a vital trade partner, distant, resource-rich land, whose vessels sailed up the Gulf with cargoes of raw materials essential to the growth of early cities. Copper from Meghan helped fuel the bronze industries of Sumer. Its hardwoods and stones were prized for construction and ritual use, though no written records from Meghan itself have yet been discovered. Archaeological excavations paint a picture of a complex society, fortified settlements, copper smelting sites, and trade ports like the ancient city of Ras al-Jinsravil, a people skilled in both metallurgy and maritime navigation. Their ships were so renowned that Mesopotamian scribes referred to them with awe. The boats of Meghan, they wrote, ride the waves like birds. By around 2000 BCE, however, references to Meghan begin to fade. Whether it declined due to shifting trade routes, environmental change, or conflict remains uncertain. What survives is fragmentary tools, pottery, and hints of a seafaring world now lost to time. Who were the people of Meghan, truly? And how did such a vital link in the chain of ancient commerce disappear so quietly beneath the desert wind and sea? Their silence leaves behind only the echo of sails on a forgotten tide. Agriculture in the arid lands of southeastern Arabia, between desert dunes and rocky coasts. an ancient civilization once flourished known today as the Anar culture, dating from roughly 2600 to 2000 BCE. This culture emerged in what is now the United Arab Emirates and northern Oman. Its name comes from a small island near Abu Dhabi, where distinctive circular tombs were first discovered, monuments of finely cut stone, built with precision and care. These burial structures, some containing dozens of individuals, point to a society deeply invested in ritual and ancestry. But Anar was more than a funerary culture. It was a hub of copper production and maritime trade, strategically positioned between the great civilizations of Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, and ancient Iran. Archaeological sites reveal complex settlements with stone houses, pottery kilns, and evidence of long-distance exchange. Copper ingots, Indus Valley seals, and Mesopotamian goods all tell of a people woven into the fabric of early international commerce. Despite their far-reaching connections, the Anar people left behind no writing, only the silent testimony of their architecture, tools, and tombs. By around 2000 BCE, their settlements were abandoned or transformed. What caused their decline is still debated. Was it environmental stress, shifting trade routes, or internal change? Their name, borrowed from an island of stone and memory, remains our only clue. Who were the Anar, truly? A forgotten nexus of ancient trade, or a lost civilization waiting to speak again through the dust? The Samad civilization, hidden in the rugged mountains and arid plains of what is now Oman. The Samad civilization emerged as a distinctive culture during the Late Bronze Age and Early Iron Age, roughly between 1300 BCE and 300 BCE. Though overshadowed by more famous neighboring societies, the Samad left behind clues that intrigue archaeologists and historians alike. Centered around the Samad Alshan region, this culture is primarily known through its burial sites, desert graves marked by stone cairns and distinctive pottery. Unlike many ancient cultures, the Samad did not build monumental architecture. Instead, their legacy lies in these cemeteries, where complex burial practices suggest a society with social stratification and ritual significance. Graves often contain finely crafted ceramics, bronze tools, and personal ornaments, hinting at craftsmanship and trade networks that connected them to broader Arabian and Near Eastern cultures. The exact nature of their social structure remains uncertain, but the careful placement and variety of grave goods implies status differences and spiritual beliefs tied to the afterlife. Little is known about their language or political organization, and written records are absent, leaving much to interpretation. The Samad appear to have lived in small, scattered communities, adapted to the harsh desert environment, balancing pastoralism with limited agriculture and trade. As the region evolved, the Samad culture faded, absorbed or replaced by emerging Iron Age societies, yet their graves continue to speak, silent but evocative, inviting questions about who they were, how they lived, and what mysteries still lie buried beneath Oman's shifting sands. The Kataban Kingdom in the rugged highlands of southern Arabia, where the mountains meet the desert winds, once stood a powerful kingdom built on the trade of incense and the whisper of forgotten gods. This was Kataban, an ancient realm that flourished, then faded, leaving behind monuments of stone and mysteries carved into time. Centered in present-day Yemen, the Kataban Kingdom rose to prominence around the 8th century BCE. It controlled a vital stretch of the incense route, exporting frankincense and myrrh, commodities as prized as gold in the ancient world. The capital Timna sat along this trade artery and was a hub of wealth. Temples and towering inscriptions written in the ancient South Arabian script. Kataban's rulers, known by the title Mukarreb, combined religious and political authority, uniting tribes under a complex system of alliances and tribute. Temples to deities like Amt, the moon god, suggest a spiritual life deeply intertwined with lunar cycles, fertility rites, and ancestor worship. And yet, so much of their daily life remains elusive. Archaeologists have uncovered irrigation systems that hint at advanced agricultural engineering and inscriptions that speak of diplomacy, war, and devotion. But by the 1st century CE, the kingdom had crumbled, perhaps due to internal strife, shifting trade networks, or conquest by neighboring Himyarites. Today, the stones of Timna still stand, silent witnesses to a kingdom once rich with incense, power, and purpose. But the full story of Kataban lies just beyond our reach, fragmented, half-buried, and waiting to be pieced together. The Sabaean kingdom high in the mountains of ancient Yemen, where terraced fields cling to stone slopes and dry winds whisper through ruined temples, once rose one of Arabia's most powerful and enigmatic civilizations, the Sabaean kingdom, flourishing. From the 8th century BCE to the 3rd century CE, the Sabaeans built their legacy on trade. They controlled the southern stretch of the incense route, exporting frankincense and myrrh to empires as far away as Rome and India. Their capital MRB was a marvel of ancient engineering, home to the famed MRB Dam, a massive structure that irrigated the surrounding plains and turned arid lands into fertile ground. The Sabaeans were governed by a complex system of kingship and priesthood, with rulers often referred to as Mukarib, a title signifying both political and religious leadership. Inscriptions in the ancient South Arabian script detail alliances, temple constructions, and offerings to Al-Maka, the kingdom's chief deity. Yet despite their achievements in architecture, agriculture, and statecraft, much about Sabaean society remains veiled. How did they organize their sprawling trade empire? What internal tensions eventually led to their decline? By the 3rd century CE, the kingdom began to wane, overtaken by rival powers like the Him. The once mighty dam collapsed, and with it, a civilization faded into silence. But in the stones of Emrib and the fragments of script etched into forgotten walls, echoes of the Sabaeans endure, reminding us that even the greatest kingdoms can be lost, their stories only partially told. The Mirib kingdom, in the heart of Yemen's highland deserts, where dust swirls over ancient ruins and the air hums with forgotten echoes, stood a kingdom defined by ambition, engineering, and enigma. The kingdom of MRB, often associated with the larger Sabaean realm, Rib wasn't just a capital city, it became a symbol of ancient Arabia's power and ingenuity. By the 8th century BCE, it had transformed into a thriving center of trade, faith, and agriculture, fed by one of the greatest engineering feats of the ancient world, the Mirib Dam. This massive dam, built of stone and earth, captured seasonal rains from the mountains and irrigated vast fields, allowing the region to flourish for centuries. The prosperity it generated turned Mib into a key hub along the incense route, where traders from India, Africa, and the Mediterranean exchanged goods beneath the watchful eyes of Sabaean kings and priests. Religion was deeply woven into daily life. Temples dedicated to Al-Maka, God, stood as both spiritual and political centers, where rulers reinforced their divine authority through ritual and monument. But over time, the waters that gave Mib life began to fail. Scholars believe the dam suffered multiple breaches, each one weakening the city's grip on power. Coupled with the rise of rival kingdoms and changing trade networks, MRB's influence slowly eroded. Today, the ruins of the dam and scattered inscriptions tell only fragments of its former glory. What truly caused the collapse? Was it nature, politics, or something still unknown? The kingdom of MRB lingers in silence, its stones weathered, its legacy half-buried, and its full story waiting in the dust. The Lihian kingdom at the sandstone cliffs and scorching deserts of northwestern Arabia, a forgotten kingdom, once held sway over trade, territory, and time. This was Lihiana realm, carved into the edge of empires and veiled in layers of silence and stone. Rising around the 6th century BCE, near modern-day Al-Ula in Saudi Arabia, the Lihian kingdom controlled a crucial stretch of the incense and caravan routes, linking southern Arabia with Mesopotamia and the Mediterranean. Its capital, Daydan, flourished as a center of governance, religion, and commerce. Towering statues, intricate tombs, and monumental inscriptions, many still visible today, hint at a society both sophisticated and deeply rooted in its own traditions. The Lionites left behind inscriptions in the Dadanetic script, referencing kings, officials, and rituals. Unlike their better-known Nabatean neighbors to the north, the Lionites maintained a distinct cultural identity, reflected in their language, art, and architectural style. Massive lion sculptures guarding tombs suggest beliefs in protection and the afterlife, while inscriptions point to a stratified society with organized rule. Yet despite their regional power, the kingdom's end remains unclear. Some believe they were gradually absorbed by the Nabateans. Others suggest internal decline or shifts in trade routes played a role. Whatever the cause, Lahian faded from history, its legacy buried beneath the desert winds. Today, archaeologists continue to unearth clues from Dedan's red cliffs, but much of Lihon's story, its rise, its rulers, and its fall remains just out of reach, a mystery suspended in stone. The Thamud carved into cliffs and echoed in scripture, the story of the Thamud lingers across Arabia like a haunting refrain, part history, part legend, and entirely mysterious. The Thamud were an ancient people who flourished in the northwestern Arabian Peninsula, possibly as early as the first millennium BCE. They are most famously remembered for their rock-cut, dwelling structures chiseled directly into sandstone mountains, particularly in regions like Al-Haya, now known as Madan Sali. These monuments stand in eerie silence, testaments to a civilization that once mastered the desert. Inscriptions in the early South Semitic script, known as Thamudic, have been found scattered across Arabia, but they tell us little about Thamud's political or religious structures. Unlike neighboring kingdoms, the Thamud left no capital city, number palaces only, carvings, tombs, and scattered traces of a vanished world. Much of what we know comes from ancient writers like Pliny the Elder and classical Arabic sources, as well as the Quran, which describes the Thamud as a powerful but arrogant people who ignored divine warnings. Their prophet, Ali, pleaded with them to turn away from corruption, but they rejected the message, and according to the account, were destroyed by a great earthquake or sound from the heavens. Were they truly punished by the divine, or did they succumb to the harsh realities of their environment? Did they fall to drought, warfare, or internal collapse? The rock-cut tombs of Madan Sali still stand, wind-worn and shadowed by centuries. But the people who made them, who they were, how they lived, and why they vanished remain a mystery carved into stone and unanswered by time.